Season 2 of The Sopranos. More crime, more drama, and more cars. Like in Season 1, cars are used by the show's writers as a tool to express the personality traits of the show's characters. They can be aspirational, ostentatious, dignified, or stylish. Whichever it is, each mobster's car reveals something to the viewer about his psyche. So, without further ado, I will be analysing and ranking the cars of The Sopranos. Season 2. Philly Parisi has an extremely short-lived appearance in The Sopranos. In fact, I think it must be one of the shortest for a named character in the show. Precisely 144 seconds after he makes his first appearance, he is unceremoniously shot in the head by Gigi Sestone, whilst behind the wheel of his 1998 Mercury Grand Marquis. Mercury is a division of Ford, with the Marquis, and its rather aristocratic name, serving as their largest saloon offering. The Grand Marquis used the Ford Panther platform, used for saloons from 1979 until the early 2010s. Ironically, this made the Marquis functionally identical to the Ford Crown Victoria during those years, which was Ford's counterpart to the Grand Marquis, and perennially popular with police departments across the United States. I wouldn't say I actively dislike this Grand Marquis, but it is just a bit bland. The styling is just a little forgettable. Perhaps that's the whole point. Mobsters don't really want to attract too much attention. A 4.6-litre Ford modular V8 provided the power, which wasn't lacking at 200 brake horsepower. However, the weight of the vehicle, paired with a standard 4-speed auto gearbox, no doubt meant it wasn't an especially interesting drive. That said, those wheels are extremely cool, and the colour is wonderful, an all too rare shade of bronze or burnished gold. Low profile comfort, 5.3
Here you go, kids.
out of 10. I know, this 1998 Ford Explorer doesn't technically belong to Richie. In fact, it is a vehicle belonging to his niece, Adriana Lacerva, as we see her driving it in Season 1, when Christopher Moltisanti offers to buy Meadow Soprano a Happy Meal, soon after supplying her and Hunter Scangarelli with methamphetamine. However, I think it is fair to say that we associate this vehicle more strongly with Richie, as he uses his niece's car to hospitalise Beansy Gator, when the mobbed-up businessman refuses to be extorted by the recently released Aprile. This Explorer is actually a Gen 2, so it has a much more rounded, modernised appearance than the Gen 1, which is notable for having appeared in Jurassic Park. The Explorer has a long and illustrious history. The model was intended as a replacement for the Bronco, which was of course the vehicle in which the Juice led the LAPD on a 90-minute low-speed pursuit in 1994. Speaking of police, rather ironically for Richie, the 5th generation Ford Explorer would go on to become extremely popular as a police vehicle, known as the Police Interceptor Utility. It would seem that the Explorer's off-road bark would be far worse than its bite. Although it looks the part, the 2nd gen Explorer was equipped with rear-wheel drive as standard, with all-wheel drive offered as an option. The V8 version had a full-time all-wheel drive system, with no selectable high or low range. The Cadillac DeVille is much more Richie's style, a classic gangster saloon. No Manson lamps fitted to this model though. I believe it's a mid-1990s DeVille, although we only see the car very, very briefly in the background, such as in the scene where Richie gives Tony the jacket, and the scene in Season 2 Episode 11 when Richie and Janice are house hunting. We see it parked on the street when Tony flees outside to have a panic attack. DeVilles are a mainstay car in mob media. For more, check out my video on Goodfellas. Suffice it to say that the DeVille is the real deal, a nice big luxurious land yacht. Furio is very upset when ordered to crush the car after Richie's untimely demise. In fact, he appears to be more upset about the car than anything else.
Cadillac, mannaggia la mani.
I'll get some.
A strong, if slightly sedate vehicle pairing. 7.2 jackets out of 10. Carmela actually has a 1994 E320 in the first few episodes of Season 1, which is then replaced by this more modern 2000 model. Primarily, we see Carmela driving it, but it is also piloted by Meadow and Tony, and even by AJ in episode 7 of Season 2, when he steals the Merc and manages to smash its wing mirror. A classic aspirational estate, beloved of the comfortable suburban middle classes. The E320 remains as Carmela's car until Season 5, when she cops the Porsche Cayenne. The 2000 model year added a semi-manual control to the 5-speed gearbox, which allowed the driver to shift between gears manually. This later model had restyled bumpers and body trim, and a revised front which made it much more similar to the CLK. Incidentally, it does have quite a similar look to Christopher's CLK, albeit in a much more toned down way. Inspired by Citroën, the estate versions had self-leveling rear suspension, where damping was achieved by gas-filled suspension spheres. However, unlike the French Citroën, the German Mercedes didn't allow the driver to adjust the ride height. It was instead fixed. If Carmela's Merc is indeed a 2000 model, then it would have either been fitted with a petrol V6 or an inline-6 diesel. The petrol may have been faster, but the diesel had the requisite torque to haul Tony and Anthony Jr.'s fat asses around. A sublime vehicle, stylish yet capable. 8.7 bird feeders out of 10. Another two-car combo. We first see Salvatore Big Pussy Bonpensiero driving a rather beaten-up old 1984 Buick Riviera. The Buick is a little old and shoddy for a veteran gangster, but then this tallies, as presumably this is the car that Pussy was using when he was in his off-the-reservation cocksucker era, as Tony puts it. And as Spoon's Parisi points out, every penny counts when you're on the lam. This car must have brought him back to New Jersey after he spent all of those months in Puerto Rico with that 28-year-old acupuncturist. Did she even really exist? Once he's back and settled in Jersey, he goes for a 1998 Cadillac DeVille, just like Richie Aprile. I unironically love this car. I mean, just look at the styling. It's brilliant. It perfectly encapsulates that 1990s, early 2000s attempt in car design to throw back to the classic styling of the heyday of American motoring, while simultaneously pulling it off in a way that ages really well, unlike the Chevrolet PT Cruiser. I think it's aided by that wonderful half-covered rear wheel arch and the fat grille on the front. The sheer size makes the car look relatively sleek and low to the ground, even if that is primarily an optical illusion. Unfortunately, it would seem that Pussy's DeVille would have been fitted with a notoriously troublesome Northstar V8 engine, as all models from 1996 onwards were. Sticker price was $37,420. Can someone tell me what sort of price you can pick one of these up for today? After Pussy is lost at sea, we no longer see his lovely DeVille. Angie must have sold it, as by the time Tony appears at her house in Season 3, she's got a brand new DeVille from the year 2000. A selection of all-American luxury, with well-aged aesthetics. 7.9 acupuncturists out of 10. Beansy is something of an ill-fated character. Before he loses the use of his legs, he drives around in a 1988 Jaguar XJ40. A fitting car for a slightly scuzzy mob-front business owner. It's stylish British luxury, flashy without being too gaudy and attention-seeking. An all-new generation of the XJ built to replace the Series 3, the XJ40 was a notable styling departure from earlier generations. The styling is very much more 80s, with the squarer headlights and front end. Beansy's had the two round headlamps in a chrome housing, rather than the composite rectangular headlights that were fitted to some models, and would have had either a 2.9 litre or a 3.6 litre straight 6. Jaguar spent an awful lot of time and money engineering this car. It's just such a shame that A, that Manson-lamped freak Richie Aprile sees to it that Beansy will never drive again, and B, that these XJ40s were beset by such a myriad of issues. For a start, British Leyland had wanted to make a V8 version, but the engineers had made the engine bay far too narrow for a V8 lump, so the car required extensive redesigning in the early 90s before a V8 version could be produced. They did have a rather nice interior, and even boasted a fancy digital vehicle condition monitor, complete with vacuum fluorescent display, which contains a 32 by 32 dot matrix screen with 34 functions, theoretically capable of alerting the driver to bulb failure, brake pad wear, unlatched doors or boot, and low coolant levels. Which would have been marvellous if it had worked, but of course this is a 1980s Jaguar, so nothing worked. The monitoring binnacle was notorious for showing incorrect bulb failure warnings. Jaguar eventually abandoned it and replaced it with analog gauges in 1990. The perfect car to waft about in, massively let down by the expense of having it in the garage every other week. 5.9 veal palm sandwiches out of 10.
This magic moment, so different and so new, was like any other.
Originally called the Continental Mark VII until 1986, when Lincoln rebranded it as simply a Lincoln Mark VII, Bobby's 1990 car is a strange looking vehicle. I can't really decide if it's ugly or not, but I actually really like it. The square front end is great, but that weird rear panelling doesn't do it any favours. It's not long enough to be a proper projecting boot, but it's also not sleek and angled enough to be a fastback. Obviously the Lincoln is massive. It'd have to be in order to fit Bacala. Luckily for him, each wheel was fitted with full air suspension, meaning the vehicle would be able to bear his ample frame with ease. These Lincolns were actually very kitted out, featuring rather snazzy digital instruments, onboard trip computers, and anti-lock brakes. The 1985 model had the honour of being the first American vehicle fitted with electronic 4-channel anti-lock brakes. Most models were fitted with a 5-litre Ford Windsor V8, but strangely they fitted a 2.4-litre BMW straight 6 diesel to some of the early models. Apparently some of these models were even fitted with a 5-speed manual transmission instead of the standard 4-speed auto. I may be wrong here, but judging by the wheels it would appear to be an LSC, that's luxury sports coupe, not large Sicilian's car. LSC models were fitted with 16-inch wheels, very similar in appearance to BBS RA rims, and shared a high output engine with the Ford Mustang GT. It's sort of the perfect car for Bacala. Decent luxury, comfortable, befitting of his position, but not a bog standard model. To the victor belongs the spoils. 8.1 quotation books out of 10.
Certamente passerà qui su di me sicuramente.
A Mercedes-Benz CLK 430 is an interesting progression from Christopher's Season 1 Lexus. Technically a downgrade, but only because the LS400 was so perfect. That said, this all-black Merc coupe, contrasted with the alloys, is insanely cool. To be totally honest with you, the styling has held up pretty well, but those little round headlights do date the car somewhat, and make it look a bit like a Rover 75. As much as I like Rover 75s, it's not a particularly good look for a Mercedes, especially since, less than a decade before Chrissy's car was built, Mercedes was still producing these eye-wateringly elegant machines. In driving the Merc, Christopher is simultaneously engaging in an extravagant display of wealth in order to assert his earning ability amongst his peers, and attempting to show his fashionable sensibilities. In a world of enormous domestic sedans, Christopher drives a sleek Euro coupe. The Merc is retained by Chrissy until the 3rd episode of Season 3. The final time we see the car is when he is awaiting a ride from Paulie and Sylvia. CLK's performance isn't to be sniffed at either, as it's fitted with a 4.3-litre V8, producing 275 horsepower, and capable of moving from 0 to 60 in 6.4 seconds. In the US market, one could purchase a CLK with the Sport package, which came with the same bodywork as the CLK 55 AMG, and the same wheels and tyres as the AMG Twin, rather fetching monoblock alloys. Usually I'd brand this kind of alloy as gaudy and ridiculous, but I think they work rather nicely with Christopher's CLK. Given that the rest of the styling is relatively understated and the colour scheme is very muted, some showy silver rims are alright. Sophisticated motoring. 8.5 natural canopies out of 10. The Scattinos are a tragic tale, an enduring warning of the dangers of gambling addiction. Not just gambling addiction, but gambling addiction combined with being a reckless fool. I mean, come on, if you're going to fritter away the kids' college fund on Texas Hold'em, at least do it at a casino, where the owners aren't going to be able to bust out your apparently successful sporting goods store in order to bleed you so dry that you have to uproot and start a new life out west. Anyway, it's a moot point, because that's exactly the situation that degenerate gambler David Scatino finds himself in. After borrowing some cash at Tony's executive game, Davey finds himself into the mobsters for 45 boxes of ZT. Quite a fair chunk, even for a man who has a pretty nice house and drives a new Acura RL, costing around $42,000 new. The VIG on that, assuming 5%, is $2,250 a week, and that's before you even start to pay down the principal. To pay off some of the money, Davey offers Tony his son's 1996 Nissan Pathfinder. The fact that Tony gives Meadow this car is a bizarrely inconsidered move by Tony's standards, as Tony is surely fully aware that Meadow and Eric are friends. But then again, as he explains to Melfi, deep down he did it to antagonise the perennially aloof Meadow. No wonder Eric is raging about the whole affair. None of this was his fault, and yet his very cool 1996 Pathfinder gets taken away. I know SUVs get a bad rep these days, and mostly for good reason, but this Pathfinder predates the hideously bland cookie-cutter sports utility vehicles which litter our streets these days. Plus, it's fitted with a 168 horsepower Nissan VG33E engine. Remember, this is a 1996 vehicle, produced prior to Nissan's strategic partnership with Renault, so this car, contrary to anything Nissan has produced recently, isn't total shit. Solid, dependable Japanese utility. 6.7 stutter steps out of 10. That concludes our analysis of the cars of Season 2. Let's see how they stack up against each other. At the bottom of the pile is Philly Parisi's slightly uninspiring Mercury Grand Marquis. Next comes Beansy's stylish but extremely undependable Jag in 7th place. 6th spot is occupied by Eric and his trusty Pathfinder. Above the Nissan is Richie with his Explorer DeVille combo. 4th place is taken by the Cadillac DeVille and Buick Riviera of Salvatore Big Pussy Bonpensiero. Just beating Big Puss to 3rd is the corpulent Bobby Bacala and his Lincoln Mark 7. In close second comes automobile aficionado Christopher Moltisanti with his CLK 430. And right at the top of the list is Carmela Soprano in her iconic Merc 320 wagon. Beautiful. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. I've been binge watching Breaking Bad, so expect a video on that in future. As ever, let me know what mistakes I've made in the comments, or just berate me over my poor taste.
I don't like that kind of talk.
I was 21. It was a very